Hello, you poets in group two, whose essays I've just read about narrative and the Ellen Bryant Voigt and the four poems. I want to make a very short. I'm hoping to keep it to 5 or 6 minutes. I don't know if either I will or not. uh, some points about, first of all, the four poems that we looked at, and secondly, about the points that you made. I'm going to tell you one thing about each one of the four poems that we looked at. Um, the only poem of that group of four, by which I'm meaning St. John, Bukowski, Kuminyaka, and Cavafy, the only one that has an idea in its head is the Bukowski poem, and the Bukowski poem is about conformity versus sort of independence and escape. Um, so it actually has an idea. Its narrative illustrates an idea. Not only that, we have a discursive speaker coming in to make sure we get the idea. Right? The other three poems are all located. They're all located in the heart. They're all located. They're all emotional poems. Each one of them has a distinctive emotion that they're attached to, though. And well, the Kuminyaka is the coldest, but let's just say that the St. John poem is very distinctly a poem which is rooted in nostalgia. Nostalgia for a missing person, nostalgia for uh, nostalgia for a time that's passed. His great skill, of course, is the wonderful, complex way that he's able to manipulate frame after frame of time zones in relationship to each other without us getting confused. One of the ways he does that is through extended syntax. He's very fluent sentence maker, and but we can follow it as more than one of you pointed out, even though it's not chronologically simplistic poem. The other highly emotional poem in the group is the Cavafy poem. A very beautiful poem, I think, and it's you could say it's also located in nostalgia, but I would say that if St. John's poem is rooted in a kind of romantic nostalgia, we don't entirely know the story and the background, the relationship with the speaker, the person who's gone. Cavafy, we don't know much about that either, except that there's a kind of pathos to that closing moment where he's sort of sniffing the bloody bandage, and that's and so that's a very distinct tonality. It's a kind of different character, a different kind of character revelation than the one in the St. John poem. We know the St. John speaker is a sentimentalist. The Cavafy speaker we know is lonely and kind of desperate. And this is a very incredibly intimate moment that we're seeing. Um, so that's true. The Kuminyaka poem is the coldest and the most objective poem, and it operates on a completely different basis than all of the three other poems. What basis does it operate on? Kuminyaka is kind of a genius when it comes to metaphor. And if you look at the structure of the poem, you see he tells the story of the horse getting stung to death after the plow hits the wasp nest in the stump. But these metaphors explode like starbursts, one after another. They're very distinctly paced. They happen with a metabolic periodicity, and that's really the amazing joy of the poem. We don't sense that the speaker is personally involved with the death of the mule at all, but what the information that comes in on the backs of the metaphors is quite interesting. It's just remarkable that we don't get entirely distracted by those metaphors, that we manage to continue reading. But that's the reward we get from reading this poem about a mule getting stung to death by wasps, is the brilliance of the metaphors just sort of dazzles us one after the other, and the mule dies in the end. Very simple narrative. These poems are each one of them completely distinct from each other, okay? So one of them has an idea, one of them is nostalgic, one of them has great pathos, and is highly intimate. The other is sort of brilliant imagistically. I want to make a few points about narrative poems in general, and poems in general. All poems usually use the three modes, and you've got to know what the three modes are. Well, what are the three modes? The three modes are lyric, narrative, and discourse. Discursive poems explain stuff. They come out of the head. Lyric poems are emotional. They're all about emotional intelligence. Narrative poems are about story in a way they come out of the mouth of a speaker, and they happen in real time. So, but poems, almost all poems are moving at least back and forth between two of those modes and often more than one of those modes. So your papers that said that things are one or the other, um, I think you know better than that, really. Um, uh, so I'll just make a few points. If you want to learn from a particular poem and you want to characterize a particular poet, look at the skill sets of their innate talent and how they've learned to exploit it. That's why they're good poems. That's why they're good poets, because they have learned how to specialize in what their talent and gift was, and they've learned to refine it, and they've learned not to try and do the things that they can't do. So St. John is no great thinker. There's no thinking in his poem. Okay, Kavavi, is very interesting poet, too complicated to actually discern to describe right now. Komunyakaa, he really leans on the image very strongly in that particular poem, and in all of his poems, what he has is he has verbal sumptuousness. He's like a treasure chest full of bright, shiny jewels, and he gives us one every 5 seconds, and so we're happy to stay, sort of on the train, on the Komunyakaa train. So a skill set, what are your skill sets? That's the kind of poem that you want to write. That's your aesthetic, strong stand. That's the foundation you want to plant your feet on. And you don't want to try and do the things that you can't do. There's lots of wrong assertions in your papers. The more people try to be really kind of make huge generalizations about the nature of narrative and stuff like that, the more they tend to say things that were simply untrue. The people who wrote these papers, I totally enjoyed all of these papers, that really limited their claims for what they were going to explore and then proved it by sticking with specific examples. Those are the strongest models. But I like that you get to watch each other's critical minds at work. I like that very much. For next week, we're going to look at bigger narrative poems because I want you to see how multiple the modes they engage in are and how heroic and sort of major a poem can be. If you're talking about narrative poems in 20th century American poetry, you're going to look at poems by Robert Frost, and we're going to read this poem called Out Out about a kid cutting off his hand with a chainsaw, okay? That's the narrative event, You can have anything in your poem. You can have a plane flying into a skyscraper at the beginning of your poem. People are going to keep reading that poem because they want to know. You can have, a drunk ambulance driver. Anything can go into your poems. It doesn't have to be personal. Okay, there were a lot of other things. I also want you to read the essay on compression by James Longenbach, because what we're going to be talking about over and over again is the way in which these two ingredients fit together, narrative and tone. You can take almost all the narrative out, and if your tonal management is good, we will know exactly what the background narrative is, So they fit together, and the Longenbach essay will make that quite clear. So that's all I wanted to say. I really enjoyed the essays. Thank you for putting so much work into them. I'm sending them back individually with my comments, and that's all.